Well, I'm Cassandra Vieten, President and CEO of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and I'm here to talk about the future of meditation research. This is a time that has been unprecedented in the amount of meditation research being conducted and published. And as you can see in this graph, in 1980 there were very few publications, in this case on mindfulness, and it's just grown exponentially in the last decade, and especially even in the past 5 years. And so this has really been due to the efforts of a large number of clinicians and researchers and scientists who understood the value of meditation for psychological well-being and emotional health and physical well-being, even things like immunity and brain function and all those things. And in the beginning, it was really hard to get the Western scientific community to understand that meditation was a viable topic for research. So they engaged in a strategy which was basically taking meditation as what was primarily a spiritual practice that comes out of several contemplative traditions, including Buddhism, and secularizing it and making it into a psychological intervention that removed the more spiritual components but left in the more mental, cognitive, psychological components. And so that is one thing, is taking the practice and secularizing it into something that would be palatable for regular Western medicine. And also then kind of narrowing the domain of meditation research to not look necessarily at what meditation was originally meant to cultivate, but looking at primarily physiological, psychological, cognitive, emotional, and brain function, body function as the primary outcomes of meditation. And in a way, taking out all of the stuff about awakening, enlightenment, cultivation of wisdom and compassion and empathy, shifts in identity, mystical experiences, being more connected with God in some contemplative practices. And so in a way, it was threading this needle to say, the way that we're going to get meditation into the West to make it useful for people for reducing suffering is to narrow it to the aspects of it that are kind of understandable to the West. And this is kind of similar in a way to the way that acupuncture research has taken place, which was initially acupuncture is a method of traditional Chinese medicine where the needling has to do with helping the flow of qi or the energy in the body. And so that was the primary purpose of the needles. As Western scientists started to get interested in integrating acupuncture into medical care, they kind of gradually took out that energy or ki or qi component and said, well, when you insert needles, it releases endorphins in the body, and that has an analgesic effect. And so now there's been sort of a materialization of acupuncture in the theoretical understanding of the mechanism of action, and that kind of makes it okay to study. So all of this is actually good in a way because it's allowed a pathway for these practices that were rooted in spiritual traditions to be utilized in the West for medical care. But the negative part of it is that it leaves out an important part of the story. And so at this point, there's sort of a off limits to scientists, to students, to educators, to medical professionals. Stay away from certain things, and it's okay if you study traditional Asian medicines or if you look into meditation. But if you really want to be taken seriously, get funding, get tenure, not be excluded from the scientific dialogue, make sure you stay away from these kinds of things like experiences of oneness and interconnectedness, or samadhis or siddhis, which is the word for kind of the powers that can come along sometimes with these kinds of practices. Shakti and Kundalini energies, where people feel this rush of energy through their body and that it feels somehow important to them and might even have an effect at some point in their life of enlivening them more than they used to be. But this isn't something that we're looking at yet in meditation research very often. People often in meditation have experiences of karma, past life recall, reincarnation experiences, visions, increased synchronicities, perceptual changes like ESP, extrasensory perception, precognition, experiences of God and deities, even other non-physical entities, There are people who have very difficult moments during their meditation practice, difficult stages of doing it. And because we're treating this a little bit like meditation is sort of a natural antidepressant, let's say, in some studies, in a way, it's not even asked sometimes, did you have any negative side effects of doing your meditation practice? There can be sometimes on the way to cultivation of increased wisdom and emotional balance, periods of disorientation, depersonalization, loosening of ego structures, and that can be really distressing, but that's also not usually included in either clinical practice or in research. There's also really interesting phenomena, I think, when people meditate in groups or in places where lots and lots of other people have meditated, where there feels like there's an energy that's created by being in the group of meditators, or that there's even an energy hanging out in the place where lots and lots of people have meditated. And that people kind of feel like, you know, when there's a bicycle race and you get the draft of the bicyclist in front of you, that somehow meditating with other people or in places where thousands of people have done it, it helps them in their practice. So the question is, what is that energy? Does that really exist? Is that just a perception? There's also a very strong tradition in many meditation traditions of teacher-student transmission, that it's not just a teacher giving you instructions on how to meditate, it's actually the teachers awakening themselves that's somehow almost contagious and helping you get the meditation practice better because they have a certain amount of clarity. So these are all right now in the scientific literature quite anecdotal. They're just things that people have described experiencing. But for the most part, it's been like, let's just not go there. Those things are too strange, they're too weird, they might contaminate the scientific method, and let's just leave those out. And so what we have thought, this Future of Meditation Research Group, is that maybe these things actually are important, and maybe they represent really fruitful opportunities for future researchers who might want to investigate these other aspects of meditation. So this group of about 20 people with another 15 or 20 advisors has met for 4 times over the course of 3 years. And during that time, we shared each other's work and experiences, and we came up with 6 domains of meditation that represent this essentially uncharted scientific territory that we think might be important to study. And then we thought, well, if people want to study them, we need to help and encourage them and give them some tools and ways to do it, because so many people are being told if they have an interest in these topics, that's not possible to study. So this group has come together to recommend directions, methods, and measures. We've written a paper. We're creating a web resource where researchers who are interested in this topic can go download measures or materials or protocols, and also an online course. So the major critiques of going into this field is that you're going to hear if you say, look, I really want to study this teacher-student transmission phenomenon, or I want to study, is it true there's an energy in a temple where someone's meditating that's different than what you might get when you were meditating in a hospital classroom or something? Well, first you're going to hear, that is non-scientific. You can't, it's just not part of science, or it's a form of pseudoscience. It's not real science. And what I would say to that is that there are no unscientific topics. There are only unscientific methods. So these phenomena are things that you can study using the scientific method and the same kinds of measures and methods and protocols and tools that we do for every other aspect of human experience and nature. The second thing you might hear then is, well, if the topic then is okay to study, there's really no way to measure any of these things, so you're going to be banging your head against the wall. And the truth is that there actually are a number of measures and protocol that exist for studying these domains, and there's a really great opportunity to develop new measures for these domains, and that in itself could provide a fruitful line of inquiry. The third thing is that you'll hear that these are experiences or phenomena that happen, but they're not very important. They're just sort of epiphenomena of the brain. They're illusory. They're just kind of, even so in the scientific and tradition, they'll say it's not important because what's really important is cognition changing, emotion changing, symptom reduction, and physiological things changing. These other kinds of things are just sort of weird things that happen that you shouldn't really pay any attention to. And even some of the meditation traditions will tell you that. So, you'll go to the teacher and say, oh my God, this thing just happened to me and I don't know what it was, but I felt like I connected with my dead father who I had it, and they'll say, don't worry about it, go back to meditating. Don't get distracted by this thing. When in fact, for many people, and here at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, we've done an enormous amount of research on people who have experienced major positive transformations in their consciousness that brought them to a place in their life that was richer and more meaningful and full of purpose and more joyful, more connected, more full of compassion, empathy, and altruism. And what they told us the key factors were in cultivating those ways of being that felt more functional and more happy to them were through these experiences that they had had, these extraordinary experiences sometimes of feeling a sense of oneness or interconnection with everything, or feeling a sense of connection with God or divinity, or feeling ego dissolution, so they didn't just feel like a separate individual, but they felt an aspect of themselves now that was connected with a greater whole. And that those really were pathways to which they found emotional balance, cognitive balance, less tension throughout their day, less attachment to the things that were stressing them out. So it's kind of interesting. So I would say these experiences are tremendously important, at least anecdotally from people that we've talked to, and they're worth investigating just because of that. And the last critique you'll get is, well, even if they're scientifically viable and they're measurable and they're important, they're so rare that they're almost meaningless. They don't happen very often. So one of the things that our group did is conducted a survey of meditators to find out what is in fact the prevalence of these experiences, and were they important to people? And so, as I said earlier, there were these 6 domains. One was mystical, transcendent, or transformative experiences, either during, after, or related to someone's meditation practice. Second was social and relational aspects of meditation. So most meditation research up until now has focused on the individual, primarily above the neck, intrapersonal aspects of meditation. In other words, what just happens inside of one person. What has been less well studied is how does meditation affect our relatedness to other people, and what does it matter if you're part of a spiritual meditation community or not? The third is more contextual aspects of meditation practice. This includes the external context and the internal context. So the external context is what kind of room are you in, who's the teacher, what kind of belief system, are there any kind of accoutrements, are there bells, or are there statues, are there deities associated with it, are there any kinds of aspects of the religious or spiritual context, or even the clinical context. What kind of a setting are you in? And then what do you bring to it as an individual in your own background? Does it matter at all what you believe or what your intention is when you come to meditation practice? And we think it probably does, but there's been less research on that. The fourth is anomalous physical phenomena related to meditation, which has to do with things like getting very prickly, cold, hot, feeling energy surges, feeling extremely tired, seeing things, hearing things, feeling electrical kinds of feelings. And we think those are important to look at, because what is happening when somebody directs their attention toward their breathing, toward their body sensations, repeating a mantra, whatever it is, why is that causing some intense physiological thing to happen as they do that or afterward? The fifth is extended human capacities. And so there are many reports of people who engage in meditative practices and they have really unexplainable things happen, like knowing that a loved one was in trouble, or feeling that a loved one passed away and then finding out that it happened, or thinking a very similar thought to what their teacher then says, or being able to see something that's going to happen in the future, having increased synchronicities the more they engage in meditation practice, feeling like more and more throughout their day, they're sort of part of a flow, so they're seeing these interesting connections between things that could be coincidences, but they also could be meaningful coincidences. So we're interested in looking at that. And then, as I said earlier, difficult states and stages of meditation practice, when people feel a sense of terror or dread or fear or pain, when they engage in meditation practice and instead of helping them sleep, it disrupts their sleep, or maybe instead of helping them with anxiety, it increases their anxiety. So I think we need to be really open-minded to the concept that these could be seen as, number one, negative side effects to meditation for some people. They might need a different type of meditation practice, or they might be very necessary steps in the pathway toward positive outcomes. But it's something that we might be able to help people with more and maybe have less dropouts from meditation interventions if we went ahead and asked about them and learned more about what's happening when people have a really hard time. So when we did this survey, we asked 1,120 subjects to respond to a lot of questions about whether or not they had had any of these experiences in the course of their meditation practice. The only requirement for being in the study was that you had to be over 18 and have a meditation practice or have had one in the past. Our resulting sample was 59% female and 41% male from 66 countries. There was a pretty normal distribution of education and age, a mean of about 14 years of meditation practice with a standard deviation of 13 years of practice. And the psychological health background of these folks was in alignment with population norms in terms of had they ever been diagnosed with a psychological disorder. And so we're not going to go through every aspect of the survey. It's described well in our paper on the future of meditation research, but just to give you an idea, this is what the survey looked like. During or after meditating, have you experienced an altered sense of your awareness? Or, did you experience an altered sense of your identity, such as feeling like someone else, transcending your personal identity, experiencing a new identity, or feeling that you had no identity? And the response set was, this has never happened, this has happened once, this has happened 2 to 5 times, this has happened many times, or this almost always happens. And so there were lots and lots of questions like this in the questionnaire. And this chart would be very difficult for you to read on this slide, but you can go to the web resource, which is at noetic.org/FOMR, Future of Meditation Research, and you can see this summary of the results that we got on many of the items. But what I want to show here is that what you're looking at on the left-hand side is the light blue. That's the response, this almost always happens. And on the very right-hand side, you're looking at the dark blue, which is the people who said this never happens. So if you go from the left to the right, from the light blue through the red, that's the number of people who have had these experiences at least once. If you go through the green, that's the amount of people who have had them 2 to 5 times. The purple many times, and the light blue almost always. And so if you look at the proportion of the sample up through the red that's had these things at least once, it's pretty enormous. And many times is also pretty large, maybe even more than we would have thought. So nearly half or over half of people having some of these extraordinary experiences. And then this is specific experiences that, if you look at the bottom, you can see that 5th from the bottom is clairvoyance or telepathy, for example, which I think many, many Western researchers would say that's extremely rare. I haven't ever had anybody tell me that. But when you actually ask someone, you can see that over half of the sample reports having had that at least once, and then nearly half many times. So I think this is really important. These experiences are happening to people. When we go through each one of these, the prevalence is pretty high. I would say the lowest prevalence was this question about disturbing feelings of fear, dread, or terror. So maybe that difficult states and stages doesn't happen to quite as many people. But certainly these extraordinary experiences are happening. And I think the main point of this is just to say that these experiences are prevalent. So the second thing is, maybe they do happen, But do they really mean anything? Do the people care about them? I mean, maybe the people themselves are like, it wasn't important to me. So when people endorsed one of these experiences, we then followed up with a question in the survey that said, how meaningful or important to you was this experience? In other words, did the experience have an impact on your thinking or feeling, your sense of self, or your worldview? And again, most of the people said that it was important to them. So in this one, this had to do with clairvoyance, for example, and of the 400 people who said that it had happened to them quite a bit, 40% say it was very important to them, and then another 20% saying that it's quite important. So this argument that it doesn't happen very often and it's not very important, I think this survey really speaks to. So I think the main point of my presentation here is that these are topics and experiences that can be studied scientifically and rigorously. They can be measured using existing measures, and there's a lot of opportunity to develop more rigorous measures, especially with the advancements in technology that we have. They are prevalent, at least in our population of people, and I think that they might be prevalent in the general population of meditators. And they are important to the people based on their own response. And then as a clinician and a psychologist and someone who's done a lot of research on transformations in consciousness, we have a sense that these experiences are very important to people's sense of self, to their identity, to their relationship to others, to their relationship to the world, really to their general understanding of the nature of reality completely. And this is what's so great about meditation research, is that it's not just about studying meditation and its efficacy. Meditation research allows us a window into human potential, what are we really capable of, and into possibly what is the nature of reality. Because it seems like people engaging in these practices are changing something about what's possible for humans. So this again is the online resource, the noetic.org/FOMR, Future of Meditation Research. And this contains a description of all the meetings that we've had as a group together, a link to the paper and the survey and the data. There's still data in the survey that could be analyzed by folks, so if you want to let us know if you want to analyze that, that would be fine. The online course, lots of resources for researchers, including measures and methods that you can use to study these techniques. And then a link to IONS meditation bibliography, which is a collection of all of the published research on meditation from the early days through about 2013, and then ways to search for literature on meditation. So in closing, I'll say to be courageous about your scientific topics and be in touch with the researchers who are part of our group if you're interested in studying these topics. And thanks for your attention.